So for Kiddushin Daf Tess, we're 3 lines up from the bottom on Chasam Beis, right after the Teku. He's actually b'kikar tanola ani. He said, "Here's a loaf of bread. I'll be mekadesh you with it." And she says, "Give it to a person. Ain't mekudesha. She's not married. Afilu ani hasamachala. Even if it's a poor person who is dependent on her support, or eats at her family's house. My timer, Amrale ki hechid mechayev nabe ana hach mechayeves behu at. So just like I have a requirement to give him tzedakah, you also have a requirement to give him tzedakah. So I'm not asking you to give it because I'm accepting the Kiddushin. I want to give it to him. I'm telling you that I'm not interested in marrying you right now. And if you want to do something with your money, give it to this ani. Give it to the poor person. How gavra to have a kamazav and chumre pischaisa. So there was a person, as we turn to Testament Aleph, who was selling beads of buttons, it looks like. If you look at Rashi's in the Old French, buttonish, so buttons, but it seems that whatever it was, they would string them up on a long string, so it looked like a necklace. Asiyahi Itza, a certain woman came, Amrale Havli Chad Shocha. She said, "Give me a shocha." So Rashi says that she was asking for the entire necklace with all the buttons on it. Amarla, he said to her, if I give it to you, will you be mekudeshes to me with them? Amrle, hava mahava. She said, just give it to me. So Rav Chama says, just give it to me, which is the way we would say it in English. It's not necessarily the literal translation from the Aramaic. That doesn't mean anything. Why? Because she's ignoring him. She's not giving an affirmative response to his question. So she wants the beads because she wants the beads, not for Kiddushin. There's a certain person who is drinking beer. So a certain woman came by. Amrale havli chad kasa, and she said to him, "Give me a cup of that stuff." Amrale yavina lach mekudeshes li. He said, "I'll give you the cup. Will you be mekudeshes to me with it?" Amrale ashkuya ashkina. She said, "I want a drink." So Amrav Chama kol ashkuya ashkina lav klum hu. So this term ashkuya ashkina, just give me the drink, is not affirmative for the Kiddushin, so she's not mekudeshes. How gavra to have a kashari tamri midikla. There was a certain guy taking dates off of the tree. It's a certain woman came by. Amrale shadi litarti. She said, "Give me 2." Amarla, he said to her, "Ishadina le mekudeshes li." He says, "I'll give it to you that you'll be mekudeshes to me with them." Amrale, she said to him, "Shadi mishta, give them to me." Amar Rav Zvid kol shadi mishta lav klum hu. So Rav Zvid said this lashon was not a lashon of Kiddushin. She was not saying yes. Ibailahu have ashki v'shadi mahu. If you would have said, "Give me something and give it to me," what's the halacha? So Rashi says because have ashki v'shadi, the verb wasn't repeated in the previous 3 cases. Ashkoye ashkin, shakil, shadi mishta, and hava mahava. So the fact that it was the double verb shows that she just wants the thing. But here, if he says have ashki shadi, what's halacham? Ravina mekudeshes, Rav Sama bar Riksa amar tag demalka in mekudeshes. So Ravina says she's mekudeshes. Rav Sama bar Riksa seemed to make some type of shvua on the crown of the king that she's not mekudeshes. V'hilchasa in mekudeshes. And we pass that she's not mekudeshes. So it's not just the double lashon that shows that she just wants the item and it's not mekudeshes. And also we paskin that if you have these cloth or silk pieces of cloth, you do not need to get them evaluated if he tries to be mekudeshes her with him. And we paskin like Rabbi Lazar, who we said on Chesam and Aleph, you be mekadesh to me with for $200, and he only gave her $100. She is mekudeshes, but he has to pay her back. And we passing that Rav Nachman that if you said be mekadesh to me with for a certain sum of money, but here's a deposit, a mashko. So a mashko, I assume, means an object as a collateral, but it's not a money deposit, because then it would be like the case of Rabbi Lazar, that you only give part. This would be an object like for a collateral. You're not mekudeshes. Two dots in the middle of Testament Aleph. Tanar Rabbanan b'shtar ketzat. So how do you get married with a shtar? Kasav lo al nior al acheres. If you wrote on paper or on earthen or pottery, afal pishain b'shav pruta, bitcha mekudeshesli, bitcha menresesli, bitcha lili into. Even though this piece of pottery or paper is not worth a pruta, he wrote on it, and this is talking about a case where the young woman is still in the Rishus Ba'ila, she's a Tanner Anara, your daughter is Mekudeshes to me, or your daughter is Mureses to me, or your daughter is a wife, will be a wife for me. Hareza Mekudeshes, she's Mekudeshes. Paskifler of Zera Bar Ma'amal, hello Dami Haishtar, Lishtar Zvine, Hasamocha Kosovla, Sadi Bukhorla, Hachabar Kosov, Bitcha Mekudeshes Li. So Zera Bar Ma'amal asks, it's not similar to a regular shtar of a sale, because if you're selling a field, the seller writes the shtar that my field is sold to you. But here, the husband, who's the one acquiring it, is the one who writes the shtar. How come this shtar is not similar to shtar of sales? Amarava Hasaminyana Dekra, Hachaminyana Dekra. Rabbi says, because the different contexts have different requirements from a pasuk perspective. The way the pasuk talks about it, when it's talking about selling your field and then having you or a relative redeeming it for Yovel before Yovel, and the field was sold from his inheritance. So the pasuk talks about a field being sold from the perspective of the seller selling it. So therefore, the seller would write the shtar. But hachaksiv ki kach. But by Kiddushin, it says when a man will take a wife. The pasuk talks about it in terms of the husband taking the wife. So he's the one who's doing the transaction by deciding to marry her. So he writes the shtar. So the Gemara asks, "Chasam namik siv sadas bakesef yiknu." The pasuk in Yirmiyah, so it's not in Chumash, but it says fields with money will be acquired. So it sounds, or you will acquire. So that sounds like it is the buyer, but it says yikanu, karube yikanu. But you could read it that they would be acquired in the passive sense, so that the purchaser is the one being passive. So we've said that still the writer, the seller of the field would write the shtar. My taima karis be yikanu. How come you read it yikanu mishum tiksiv umachar? Because the other pasuk in Vayikra in Parshas Bahar says umachar. So, and he will sell. So that informs us that the other pasuk informs us of how that other pasuk in Yirmiyah should be read. But hachinami karbe ki yikach ki yikach. But why don't we also say that the case of the Kiddushin, that we should read it that the woman is taken, because the ksiv is biti nesati l'shazeh, because in the parsha of Motzi Shemra, where the husband falsely accuses her of not being a psula, the father says, "My daughter I gave to this man." So from that perspective, that pasuk, it seems to say that the kinyan is dependent on the woman, or if she's too young, on her father. Elama Rabba Hilchasa Ninhu Vasmachinhu Rabbana Nakra. Rabba says it's Hilchasa. So really, it seems it's a halacha Moshe Sinai, both for the way you sell a field and also for the way that you're mekadesh a woman. But the Rabbanan made an asmachta on the pasuk. So meaning kiikach and umachar mechuzaso isn't the reason why we do it. It's halacha Moshe Sinai, but the Rabbanan made an asmachta so people would be familiar with those halachos. Now Tosfos, it doesn't seem to like the opinion that it's a halacha Moshe Sinai for various reasons. And he says, maybe you can answer that because one of our psukim here was not from It seems it's Divrei Kabbalah. Now, Divrei Kabbalah is like a pasuk from Nach. So the pasuk in Yirmiyah, Sados Bekesef Yiknu, is only from Navi. So it's not such a strong question when we ask a question from it. And then he gives a second answer. Or when he says Hilchos, he doesn't mean halacha Moshe Sinai, which is the normal way think of what Hilchos means. But in this case, he means Hilchos Medina. It seems that was the custom of the people. And Goz Habach points out that we have this on Daf Lamed Ches Amud Beis later on Hilchos Medina. So I think a way to understand it is, for example, the kinyan of situmta. So situmta is when merchants complete a sale, they make a handshake. So even though a handshake isn't a kinyan in halacha, but because merchants commonly make a handshake to seal a deal, therefore having the handshake has become in halacha a way to show that a deal is completed. And therefore, let's say when we sell chametz, we also, besides for the other kinyanim that we do to sell the chametz with some money and chalipin, we also do a handshake. So I think that Hilchos Medina means that for whatever reason, and it's not opposed to the psukim, is that sellers of real estate wrote the shtaros, and the husband would, or the prospective husbands would write the shtar. So because that's the way it was done, so the halacha is that's how it's done. That's Rava's answer. And so even though it's not the Torah reason, but because that was the practice of the countries of Chachamim also, for an asmachta reason, they connected it to a pasuk so people would remember what to do. It's like a mnemonic. The Ibai saying, or he could say, because also by buying the fields in Yirmiyah, he says, I will take the book of the acquisition. So again, that sounds like and that he was buying the field, so it has to be that the seller must have given it to him, because if he was the buyer and he would have written it, he wouldn't have had to take it. Va'amar Rava, 7 lines up from the bottom. Amar on Tesamad Aleph. Va'amar Rava, Amar Rav Nachman. Kasav lo al haniyar al acher saf pisha in boshav pruta bitcha mekudeshesli bitcha meresesli bitcha lili into bein al idei avia bein al idei atzma mekudeshes. Midaito for hushalo bagra. So if a man wrote on a paper or on a pottery, even though it's not worth a pruta, your daughter is mukudeshes to me, your daughter is mureses to me, your daughter will be my wife, whether it's through her father, whether it's through her mikudeshes, midaito, as long as the father knows about it, because if she's not a bogeris yet, he's the one who has control. But if he lets her receive this, so then it works, midaito, v'hushla boger, as long as she's not a bogeris. Kasavla, because once she's a bogeris, the husband would have to write it to her, and not as if it's addressed to the father that your daughter is mekudeshesli. And if the man wrote on the paper on the pottery, even though it's not worth the pruta, you are mekudeshes to me, you are my wife, you are meureses to me. She is mekudeshes, whether he gives it to the father or to herself, but both of those cases have to be midaita, with her consent, and that is when she already became a bogeris, because now she's a full adult. I mean, Anara is an adult in regard to bas mitzvah, let's say, but bogeris, she's fully autonomous and independent, so the father can receive it on her behalf. It's midaita, and that's when she's a bogeris. Really small question is, why is this statement, does it change the lashon mekudeshes, meureses, and lila into? And this last one is it has mekudeshes first, it has lila into second, and meureses last. A small question, not a big question. Okay, 2 dots, second line from the bottom on Tesamad Aleph. If you wrote a shtar erison not lishma, meaning he found that someone written somewhere harei mekudeshes, so he took the paper, can he give it to her to be mekudeshes? So I think I mentioned this at the beginning when we talked about shtar, when we learned that it was a limud from get. Havayos li'tzios makshinan. Do we make a hekesh between Kiddushin and divorce? Ma yitzia be'inan lishma afavaya nami lishma. Do we say since a get needs to be written lishma because it says because of law and the drasha is lishma? So therefore, when you write a shtar Kiddushin, it also has to be lishma for her sake. Odilma havayos la'adadi makshinan. Or do we compare all types of Kiddushin to each other? Ma havaya de kesef lo be'inan lishma afavaya de shtar lo be'inan lishma. And just like, let's say, if you were mekadesh with money, the money didn't have to be minted for to be used as Kiddushin for her. So to a shtar doesn't have to be written lishma. Basar Debaya have a Pashta. After he asked the question, he was confident that he knew the right answer. And Havaya Letzia Makshinan, we do compare Kiddushin to Gittin. So the Amar Krav Yatzav Haisa. So because of Yatzav Haisa, if you were being Mekadesh with a shtar Kiddushin, it needs to be written Lishma. Now, for a get, it has to be written Lishma, Ulishma, Ulishtem Gerushin, for this wife, for this husband, and for the sake of Kiddushin. It happens to be that Reish Lakish only asked about Lishma. It didn't say Lishmo. Now, a get has the husband's name in it also. The shtar Ksuba apparently does not need to say that you're Mikudeshes too, Yitzchak ben Abraham. And it also doesn't say about L'Shem Kiddushin, but I mean, if you're writing it for this particular woman, it is obviously written L'Shem Kiddushin. Okay, 2 dots. Idmar, Kasu Lishma Shlomi Daita. If you wrote it Lishma, but not with her knowledge. Rapapa of Rav Shravya, Rav of Ravina Amar Mikudeshes, Rapapa Rav Shravya Amar Ena Mikudeshes. Rav and Ravina says she is Mikudeshes, Rapapa and Rav Shravya says she's not Mikudeshes. Amar Rapapa, Ema Time Ditu, Ema Time Didi. I'll tell you your reasoning that you said it's okay, and I'll tell you my reasoning that I say it's not okay. So your reason that it works is because a get works without her consent, but it has to be written lishma, but it could be without her consent. Therefore, this shtar kedushin could be written without her consent also, but it has to be written lishma. The aim at time didi, and I'll tell you my reasoning. And then my reason is because of the hekesh between Kiddushin and Gittin and Gerushin, just like divorce needs the das makna. So the husband is the one who is, the husband who is giving her the get by which she will become her own autonomous person again. So his das needs to be supplied for the get to work. It's true she doesn't need consent, but he's the one who's being makna her back. Because remember, our Mishnah said, "V'konas asma," she acquires herself. Well, what's the authority that's makna her? So that's the husband. Afavaya ba'ina das makna. But Kiddushin also needs das makna. And in this case, it's the woman's consent to become married to him, or the father's consent. Meisave, this is the first right line. I'll ask you a question. Ein kosun shtar irsin rusun elamidash my love shtar irsin rusun mamish. It says you're not allowed to write contracts of irsin and nisuin except with consent of both. So that would be like Rapapa, that you need the das of the Isha. My love, shtar Erison and Nisuin Mamish doesn't mean literal shtar of Erison and Nisuin. So shtar Erison, that's what we're talking about. What exactly shtar Nisuin is, I'm not sure, because how do we do Nisuin is chuppah. So I don't know what type of shtar Nisuin, what a shtar Nisuin would be. So the Gemara says, "Lo shtar psikta of gidol." So it's what we call tanaim. That's what Rashi says. It's a document, a shtar which documents what each side is going to pay towards a wedding or for the dowry, things like that. So it's not the shtar of the wedding itself, but it's for the side or the parallel monetary considerations. Rav Gidol Amarav, the Amar of Gidol Amarav, Kama Atanos and Levincha Kach Lekach Levincha Kach Lekach. If they said, how much are you going to give for your son? So such and such a sum to your daughter, I'll pay such for such and such. So Amdu V'Kitshu Kanu. Once they did the Kiddushin, they have acquired the obligations to pay these sums that they'd agreed on. Hein Hadvarim Haniktin B'Amira. These are things that are acquired with Amira alone, and they don't need its own kinyan. So So meaning once the people agreed for these psalms, and then the one's son was Mekadesh, the other one's daughter. So even though the Kinyan is only on the Kiddushin, but because it came from the context of them talking about how much money they're going to pay each other or pay the young couple, so the Kinyan works to seal the deal on what they said, and they don't need any other. The Kinyan takes place. So I mean, it's a little strange because the Gemara just says, "In kosun shtar eris in nusun al midashnehem," and then it says that Rav Gidel says that you don't even need a star. So I guess it's saying if you did write it as a star, you would need it. So Rashi says they're nicknamed Amira. You don't need a kinyan because the Kiddushin is the seals the deal. Because with the Hana that they're becoming mechutanim with each other, the kinyan takes place. And with those tanaim, those monetary considerations, so in that witnesses are not allowed. I guess that's what Riddle is saying. Rashi says that the witnesses are not allowed to write a star because the two sides are good enough for it to be an oral arrangement and not a malva b'shtar, like a loan that was written on a star. Oh, so according to Rashi, what you mean in kosun shtar irsin or nesuin elamidashnam is that people who witnessed it aren't allowed to write it on a star that Shmerel agreed to this and Beryl agreed to that, and they signed with Adam. It's so he's saying that they prefer it as Rav Gidel Paskin that you don't even need to write it down. Once they agree, it works. So therefore, you're not allowed to write the star down. That's what it says. You're not allowed to write the star irsin or nesuin elamidashnam. And now we understand why it's a star nesuin. Some might be Tanaim for before the wedding, and then the Shtar Nisun would be the Tanaim claims or monetary arrangements that they would make after the chuppah is complete. Ubabia, the fifth wide line. Mina lan. How do we know that you could be Mekadesh Babia? Amr Vabo, Amr B'Yochna, Amr Kraba Ulaz Ba. So she is the Ba'ula of her husband. Malame Chinasa Labal Aide Be'ila. So we learned that she becomes having a husband through a bia. Amr B'Zer Rabbi Bo, Amr La Reish Lakish Rabbi Yochanan Ka'ura Zushashana Rebbe. Is Rebbe's drasha that Rebbe darshaned disgusting to you, or that there's something wrong with it that you had to come up with this drasha? But we already have another drasha that Rebbe himself darshaned ubala. It says Kikach Isha Ubala. And we saw this on Daf Dalet, that when a man takes a woman ubala, so that teaches us that she could be acquired through bia. So the Gemara says, if it was only from Rebbe's drasha, you might think that you had to do Kiddushin with kasef or with shtar, and then bia would be the final step. But you couldn't do it. You couldn't be mekadesh for bia by itself. Maskif la Rav Abba bar Mamo. Im kain. If so, Nara Marasa is a young woman a Nara who had Kiddushin, and she committed adultery, so or she was raped. So if it was adultery, they both get skila. If it was just rape, just he gets skila because obviously she was an ones. So if you would have the drasha that kikachisha ubala, how could you have a case where she would be fully married without a bia? And if she didn't have, and if she already had a bia for the Kiddushin, she wouldn't be a Nara Marasa who was still a basula. So the ida akdish v'hadar boal ba'ulahi. If you gave her Kiddushin with kasef and then was boal her, she's not a virgin anymore. Ida ikdish v'lo boal lav klimhu. And if he had Kiddushin and he wasn't boal her, he didn't finish the bia process according to this understanding of Rebbe's drasha. You need kiikach and bala. So Abaye says that that her aros, the one who gave her Kiddushin, was boal her, but not through the normal way. So she's still a basula, but he was boal her. Amalei Abaye Kanlo Pligi Rebbe Rabbanan Ela Ba'acher. So Abai says there's a machlokes in Rebbe and Rabbanan with someone else, not her husband, being Baal her shalokadarka. Baal divra calling Baal shalokadarka sabaula. But if the husband was Baal her shalokadarka, even though she's still a virgin, because she has her hymen still, she becomes a baula. So then Nara Marasa wouldn't apply. Maihi. So what's the limud that we know that both Rebbe and Rabbanan agree that that the husband could always make her a ba'ula even if she still has a hymen to Tanya, because we learned in the Brayso if 10 men raped her and she's still a virgin, so it means that they were Baal Shalom Kedarka, Kulan Beskila. They all get skila. Rebbe Omer Ani Harishon Beskila Kulan Bechenek. Rebbe says, I hold that only the first one gets skila, but the rest only get chenek, like regular adultery. So, meaning once the first person, even though he wasn't her husband, was Baal her Shalokadarko, she is now considered a Ba'ula. And when she's a Ba'ula, the halacha of Narmaras doesn't apply anymore, but the halacha of adultery still applies. So it's a different death penalty. So we see that so the Tanakama holds even that the husband would make her a Ba'ula, but this is because these people are not her husband. She's not considered a Ba'ula. So we see that both Rebbe and the Rabbanan hold that it's possible for someone to be Baal her Shalokadarka makes her considered a Ba'ula, even though she still is physically, literally has a hymen and is a Basula. But Rebbe says someone who's not the husband can also make her a Ba'ula, and the Tanakama holds no, only the husband can. Amr Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Mishkachas Lakagon Shekitcha Bishtar. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, even according to, is it to Rebbe, she could be fully Mikudeshes and still be a Basula for it would fit the definition of Nara Marasa in a case where she was Mikudeshes with Shtar, because when Rebbe, according to Rebbe's, our understanding of Rebbe's drasha, that you need ki with kesef, and then he's Baal her, that you need the Be'ila for the Kiddushin if you started it with kesef. But if you started it with Shtar alone will make her Mikudeshes without a Bia, so she'll still be a Basula, literally and halachically. Since Shtar, a get, completely divorces her, Shtar completely acquires her. So I don't think it's possible to say that Shtar would do Arison and Asuin, but at least it's a full Arison, and according to this understanding, Kesef, Kiddushay Kesef doesn't do a full, according to this understanding of this Chita, Kiddushay Kesef doesn't do a full Kiddushin without a Bia. Rabbi Yochanan Hayubal Amayabidle. So if Rabbi Yochanan used the drasha of Bu'ulas Baal, why does he do it the drasha of Ubala that Rebbe used to show that there's Kiddushay Biga? How he needs it to teach a drasha that a wife could be acquired with Bia, but an Ama Ivriya, the girl who's sold as a slave, she's not acquired with Bia. I might think we could learn that an Ama Ivriya is acquired with Bia from a Kavachomer from a case of Yibam. A Yavama who is not acquired with Kesef can only be acquired with Bia. So to this Ama Ivriya, which could be acquired by Kesef, by the man paying the father for her. So I might think that she could certainly, or through Kavachomer, she should be acquired with Bia. But then we ask against that limud, Mali Yavama Shkein Sekukuvo Mades. But a Yavama already has a connection to her, to the Yava, because she was married to his brother. So there's already some connection. But for Amavria, there's no connection at all. So maybe Bia wouldn't be able to be Mekadesh. So because it says in regard to Amavria, if he could do Yud for her, which is to marry her, and if he takes an additional wife, so Hekisha Kasav Lacheres, the pasuk makes a similarity, a hekish between the Ama Ivriya to a different wife. Ma Acheres Mekani Babia, Af Ama Ivriya Mekani Babia, just like a regular wife could be acquired through Bia, so too this Ama Ivriya, this young slave servant, can be acquired with Bia. Kamash Malan. So therefore, we need between the Kavachomer and the Hekish, I might think you could acquire an amma with bia. Therefore, Rabbi Yochanan needs the pasuk ubala to show that only a wife could be acquired with bia, not an amma. And of course, a yavama could also be acquired with bia. For Rabbi Haisvarim and Ale, how does Rabbi know that an amma ivriya cannot be acquired with bia? Imkain lichta rachmana uba. My ubal lashmami natarti. It should have just said kikachi shisha ubal. How come it says uba Allah? He was baal her to show that it's so you learn two halachas, that you need the bia after the kesef kiddushin, and also that he's only baal her, only a wife, not an amma ivriya. Well, Rav da Amar Barahina Asperli kikachi shisha ubal kiddushin. I'm certain the bia have a kiddushin. Kiddushin shem is certain the bia have a kiddushin ma'ikla neimar. Rava says that Barahina, who apparently was an Amora, taught Rava this svara that kikachi shisha ubala teaches us a separate halacha that kiddushin are only kiddushin if you could be baal her, but if you can't be baal her, it's not kiddushin. So, for example, if you are mekadesh one of two sisters, but you don't know which one it is, you can't be married to her, because if you pick the wrong one, that's a case of achos ishto, which is has a death penalty. So you need an isha you're able to be baal. So Ma'ikla Maimar. So according to him, he darshans at kikachisha isha bala. How does he know the halacha that Amma Ivriya is not acquired with bia? Im kein nichtav kra obal, when you acquire a woman or are boal her. My ubala shmamina kulhu. So because it says kikach isha ubala, the and could work, I guess, with Rebbe Shita that it's a kicha and bia, and maybe he agrees with Rebbe that ubal and ubala, but kikiach isha oba, and the third halacha that he needs to learn is that you need isha that you're able to be boa. Rabbi Haibulas Ba Mayavidle. So Rabbi Yochanan makes a Joshua Bulas Baal to show that there's nickness Babia. Rebbe learned it out from Kikachisha Ubala. So what does Rebbe learn from the Drasha of Bulas Baal? Hami Baile Baal also so Baula Shlokadarka Venacher also so Baula Shlokadarka. So he needs to teach us that a husband can make sure Baula even Shlokadarka, but someone who's not her husband makes her Baula Shlokadarka. So that Bu'ula's Baal, the husband makes her consider Bu'ula. But there's an obvious question that the Gemara is about to ask. Umi Eastley, the Rebbe Haisvara, Vatani Ba'ala Yira Nashim Adain Hibsula Kulam Beskila, Rebbe Omer Ani Arishim Beskila Kulam Bechanek. So we just learned in the Brisa halfway up the Amud here that Rebbe holds that if 10 people are Baal her Shlokadarka, the first one makes her Bu'ula, and that's not a husband. So we just saw Brisa that clearly Rebbe doesn't hold that only the Baal makes her a Bu'ula. So Amr Abzeira, as we turn to Yudam and Aleph, Moda Rebbe Leinian Kas, Sukula Mishalmi. So Rebbe says, even though the 10 people who are Baal her Shlokadarka, only one gets Skila and the rest get Chanek, because she's already a Ba'ula, so they only are Chaya for adultery, not for Nara Marasa. But he agrees that because they rape a Nara Marasa, she has to pay Knas. So that's, let's say, the halach in the third parak of Suvos. That's all about paying Knas. So he says that even though they don't get skila, but they do have to pay knas. That in regard to knas, she's not considered ba'ula. To kulhu mishami, that they all have to pay knas. Ma'ishna biktala. So how come she's not considered? How come she is considered ba'ula in regard to the death penalty, but she's not considered ba'ula in regard to paying knas? Shani hasan damakra umeisa isha shershachavi mo levada. Because the pasuk says, and the man that laid with her will die himself. So levado, only him, and not any of the other people. So only in regard to it's a special miyud for the death penalty that only that first one will get a death penalty, but it doesn't mean that of skila the rest will get chenek. But it's still a case where they'd have to pay the 50 shekel of knas. We'll leave it here. What do the Rabbanon learn with levado? The third line on Yud Amud Aleph.